Today on Eyewitness Newsmakers Ask the Mayor, viewers question the police and fire department's early retirement program known as DROP. We'll ask Mayor Garcetti if the city planned to pay out so much. Viewers are still calling foul about the new recycling program, Recicla, and skyrocketing fees. Bike lanes and bike accident payouts have stirred up viewers, and viewers want to see results now for their new taxes to house the homeless. There was good news for Watts, where the mayor celebrated a new $35 million grant.
If you're feeling worried about what's coming out of the White House, just worry about who's in this house. That's all that matters. And the power that we have and the power that we can exercise is right here in our hands.
ABC 7 presents Eyewitness Newsmakers with Adrian Alpert.
Good morning. I'm Adrian Alpert. Mayor Garcetti, good morning and welcome back.
Thank you.
We have a whole bunch of questions about how you're spending our tax dollars, but first, the weather. We're 6 inches behind normal, should be 8 inches. We're at about 2 rainfall this year. Any thoughts about imposing new restrictions on our water usage?
Well, the drought is real. The winter never has come so far. It's been like summer in January and February. And I'm proud that Angelino saved 20% a couple years ago when we said we had to reduce what we were consuming, most of that in landscaping. And we're still paying people to dig up their lawns that they're not using, to be able to plant beautiful flowering, less thirsty plants, and that still exists. Even last year when it was wet, we kept that 20% savings, unlike a lot of cities where people started taking longer showers. So just continue what we are doing, and for those that are out there, remember 50% of the water we use is for landscaping, and that's the best place where you can get bang for the buck, reduce your water bills, help us through the drought, and continue moving forward. One last thing is we broke ground on my ambitious schedule to try to get 50% of our local water to provide our overall water supply, instead of depending on the Colorado River, depending on the LA Aqueduct. And so in the San Fernando Valley, we broke ground on the first one, which is $60 million to clean up the aquifer in the San Fernando Valley and let rainwater go back in there, which we can draw from on drought years.
All right, let's get to our first viewer question. This is from John Maloney of Los Angeles. Can the mayor address the fraud identified recently by the LA Times in the police and fire department's DROP and disability programs?
Absolutely. There's no place for fraud, whether you're a police officer, firefighter, or any city employee, for saying that you have some sort of disability or you need medical leave when you don't. And we actually have full-time staff in LAPD that investigates other police officers and city workers. And you'll see from the district attorney, as we have had in recent years, a number of prosecutions that move forward, and those are criminal prosecutions, felony prosecutions. So that's serious stuff. But the DROP program, on the other hand, which is allowed, it's a deferred retirement option program, allowing officers who would retire to stay on a few extra years because it's cheaper. It helps us retain folks. They're experienced detectives, they're experienced officers. That's something that I want to see continue as long as we can make sure that it's revenue neutral.
When that was pitched in 2001, it was going to be revenue neutral, but this investigation has proved that half who are taking DROP have taken some kind of disability while they're still collecting with to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, that's correct. That may be for a day or two. It may be for a year. So there's a whole range. Just that people have taken it doesn't mean that they're all off. But it is whether they're on DROP or the number of officers and firefighters we have. Look, we have to support people who are in physical harm, who go through demanding things, and they deserve the same medical coverage that anybody else would get. That said, we need to make sure, as it did in the previous two studies, that it was revenue neutral. The last one we had questioned that. And so I want to sit down with our firefighter, police unions and say, what can we do to keep it, heal it, because it is something good to have more officers and more firefighters, but we do have to meet the letter of the law that has to be revenue neutral, and I think there's some fixes.
5 city council members are calling for an investigation into this. Isn't that fair?
Absolutely, and I joined them on that. I support them. I was this morning with a number of them talking about that, and it's very important for us to make sure that fraud is not allowed anywhere by anyone, but overall, at a time, remember in the 80s and the 90s when we couldn't retain police officers, firefighters, this is a critical way of making sure we have the coverage. We need to investigate, is that still the situation now, and how do we make sure it's a value added for our taxpayers?
Do you see some kind of new oversight for this, and what would that be?
No, I think one of the things we have to fix is we did see a huge amount of our disability pensions go down once DROP was there. In other words, people would still do this in the past even without this retirement program, because as they get older, firefighters who had a lot of physical demands on their bodies, police officers as well, would go and put off the surgery that they had needed for a number of years. We have to continue to make sure that we're doing that earlier, diagnosing that, getting people healthy, because that saves us money, period. So whether we have drop or not, that is the best way for us to make sure we have as many police officers on the street, as many firefighters out there.
You're aware that many departments across the country have removed or
Yes.
pretty much eliminated their drop programs.
Absolutely, and we've seen that, you know, San Diego, San Francisco, other places. Some maintain it too, and as long as it is revenue neutral, I think it's value added, but we got to sit down with our unions and have that serious conversation, root out as much fraud as possible. We have investigators full-time on that. You'll hear probably in the next month some of those prosecutions actually moving forward. Coincidentally, as this article came out, that was already in the works.
All right, let's go to our next viewer question on another topic that has been much in the news. Cher Arabalo of Los Angeles. I live in a G.H. Palmer building downtown, and my trash suddenly went from $6.50 a month to $120 due to the Recycle LA, or how do we pronounce that? Recicla program. This was more than my yearly rent increase. How can this be justified, and what can be done to relieve the average citizen from these drastic price increases?
Well, I can't speak to what landlords are doing on that, but absolutely, we need to, and I've been on the side of folks saying that the folks who have won these franchises to collect trash, remember, a lot of buildings weren't recycling when they're multifamily apartments, and our commercial spaces weren't, and we can't landfill anymore. So there was going to be an increase for this to make sure that we have mandatory recycling for everybody, and that we don't have so many trucks causing so much traffic, cheap trucks that are polluting, et cetera. So part of that is happening throughout California. 99.75% of the pickups have happened on time. So it sounds like that's a really good statistic, right? But 0.25 of a million plus pickups means, you know, 10,000, 20,000 pickups didn't occur. And that's what we are focused on. And these trash companies need to know that if they can't meet that, we will look at everything on the table, including changing the entire system, if they don't do as good a job as the city does collecting trash.
Investigators point to the fact that by making these exclusive contracts in the 11 zones throughout the city, that it just eliminated the competition that would keep prices down.
Well, vice versa, when there was a free-for-all, you had so many trucks, so much traffic, the race to the bottom on what they were paying their workers, on the pollution coming out of the trucks, and no mandatory recycling. So we don't want to confuse those two issues, but like I said, everything's on the table if they can't meet the goals they said they would do. And most importantly, I want to see relief for folks like this who have been overcharged, who have been unfairly burdened with things that weren't in the contract that we believe are happening out there. And so that, I'd like to see those refunds or some relief immediately. That's my expectation of these companies.
Now, these companies were given 10-year contracts, correct? Can you tear them up?
Well, we're looking at that, and we're letting people know we can suspend for just cause, and where folks aren't doing their job, we are absolutely looking at whether we can suspend. The city has a better, you know, with our public trash trucks, a better record of on time. And in fact, whenever anybody calls us now, guess who's usually coming to the rescue? It's our public trash trucks. So, you know, that's an option. We certainly can suspend and have the city can take in there. And then we have to look at what our options would be with any of these companies over the 10-year process of whether that could be broken too. But let's try to get it right. February is the end of the transition period. Now it is on, and these are in place. There's been a lot of a reduction of missed pickups just in the last few months, and that's a really good sign. But we also want to look at the fees that are being, we sometimes think, exorbitantly charged.
And can you renegotiate at this point too?
There are provisions that allow us to sit down with them and make sure, or suspend, yes.
And were you surprised when there were charges for things like moving a trash can,
Absolutely.
beeping open a gate? Some of these matters that would be, isn't that part of the cost of doing business?
I thought that was a moral, and I said, use common sense. Sometimes you can charge, but you don't have to, and other times you shouldn't be charging. And that's really where we've drilled in. If anybody has problems, we have full-time people working on this around the clock. Recicla.com. Go there or call our 800 number. And we've been going out there, bringing down those bills dramatically for a lot of people and being their advocates for these fees that are unfair.
Okay, so bottom line. Recycla, what should we call it?
I don't know, everybody says Recicla. I like Recycla because it's about Recycle LA. But I think either way, the good thing is we're going to have a lot less landfilling, less pollution, more predictability, but they got to do their job.
All right, we're going to get into some other city services, such as filling potholes, but
Great.
They're telling us we need to take a break, so why don't we do that, and we'll come back with more of your questions for Mayor Garcetti right after this.
You're watching Eyewitness Newsmakers.
We are back with questions for Mayor Eric Garcetti. Let's get to our next one, Mr. Mayor. This is Manny Garcia, Los Angeles. What happened to all the approved measures to help the homeless? Nothing seems to be different or happening. Things are getting worse. They need help. You know, we're also talking about the 75% increase in homelessness in the last 6 years.
Absolutely. Look, this has been years, even decades in the making, and we have dreamed for decades of having funding sources that would finally address the shortcomings in federal, state, county, and city dollars. Thanks to the voters, Manny, this is passed now. So we have HHH, which is to build 10,000 units of housing approved from the city, and a quarter-cent sales tax for the next decade for services. That money started flowing in October. Remember, it only passed in March, so it has to be collected and then spent. We're hiring 1,000 people right now. Outreach workers, social workers, mental health professionals. In fact, if people want jobs, you can go to LAHSA.org, LAHSA.org/jobs. You can get one of those jobs right now. So the patience we have to have, we are working urgently, but we can't get the money before the state gave it to us. We are now collecting it, and you will see that difference. 10 projects breaking ground just this year alone for housing. We had our first one in December. And my expectation is this year with our homeless count, we won't see the numbers go down this year, maybe even next year. But starting then, when you see the impact of these teams, of these 1,000 new people, and really $4.5 billion, there will be a difference.
When you talk about the homeless count, let's just go back to that for a moment. Just conducted. When do you expect results from that? And
they usually about 2 months later. I mean, my expectation is it will still probably go up this year or remain flat, and maybe even beginning of next year. But after that, we will see it come down short of a recession or other crises. We're also calling on the state. I came together with 11 mayors of this state to say this isn't an issue. This is the issue. Kevin Faulconer, the mayor of San Diego, said this is the biggest thing in his town. Lee Brand, the mayor of Fresno, said it's the biggest thing in his town. I was in the nation's capital, and there's tents everywhere. Something is happening, and you can't just depend on cities who are the poorest of all of those entities to figure out a way on their own. We need federal help. We will need state help with a surplus of $6 billion this year. If this is an emergency, I don't know what is. And we will apply the H and HHH dollars.
There's some discussion about some infilling on city-owned parking lots, creating housing that is low cost, retaining some of the parking, but creating these projects. This seems to be a fraught idea at this point with a lot of pushback.
No, we're going to move forward. I'm treating this like an emergency. If this was an earthquake, we would find a way to make those parking lots a place where people could have shelter. It's a question of whether they're on tents, committing or victims of crime, addicted to drugs, hopeless, not getting their health care, not being healed, and still staying in that neighborhood, or moving them to a place where we can begin to heal and give people services. To me, that is a clear choice, and I will keep pushing. In fact, with United Way, Mark Ridley Thomas and I are launching a campaign that will really encourage every community to find a place to house our homeless populations. Up in Sunland Tahunga, where we want to take people out of where there are fires starting, for instance, we found that about 70–80% of those people who are homeless grew up in Sunland Tahunga. So if every neighborhood council, about 100 of them, would find 250 beds with us, a location for that, we finally have the money to do it. That could make sure there's no homeless people on the streets of LA in the next decade.
But I was also talking about the idea for permanent buildings of low-cost housing on the city-owned parking lots.
Oh yeah, no, we're going to continue with that. Look, we cannot afford to say no. And once these are built, it's my experience, people are like, that is beautiful housing. We love these folks. We know that veteran who used to be living in his car who's there, that couple who used to be on the streets. It really humanizes who these people are, and we realize they're much closer, and there but for the grace of God go I. This won't just be solved from City Hall. This will be solved by churches, synagogues, communities, and others coming together and saying we can all do something where we live.
All right, we need to move on, and there's going to be two questions I'm going to read to you now regarding our bicycles, our streets, and the condition of them. Sherry O'Dear of Mar Vista said, you said you would restore Venice Boulevard if it wasn't working. It's not working. Family businesses are closing. Traffic is diverted to neighborhoods, making them unsafe. Idling cars are destroying the air quality. Children can't play in the neighborhood. Over 40 accidents on this 0.8 of a mile stretch of Venice Boulevard. And John Brown, Los Angeles says, why can't LA create useful point-to-point bicycle infrastructure without impeding vehicle traffic, rather than adding useless road diets that only create antagonism and enrich consulting and engineering firms?
Well, I do agree with John in general, and I've asked folks, where can we find protected bike lanes that aren't at the expense of car lanes? LA River Bikeway is a great example. We put that in Measure M, and it'll be fully funded, so really a backbone for the bikeway from the San Fernando Valley all the way down through downtown and south to Long Beach. Another example of that, we're looking at ways we can maybe take wide sidewalks, and as we see in other cities, create part of the bike lanes right there while still having plenty of room for pedestrians, and we've done that on a couple bridges here. That said, I said, we'll always look at each one. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Venice, I've actually seen Venice Boulevard, the evidence of really successful stuff. Look, businesses open and close. Sometimes the bike lane gets a blame, but I've talked to a lot of people who are quite happy. In Playa Vista, where it wasn't, sorry, Playa del Rey, where it wasn't working, we did change that, where it was increasing accidents. So you have to look at that evidence. I listened to local council members and to those communities, and I think that we have to have an interconnected system. Part of the reason people don't see a lot of bicyclists is sometimes they don't feel safe, and I agree with John, wherever we can do that safest is best.
Well, so could you take out Venice Boulevard?
So far, the evidence I've seen, I'm not moving that away, and I've seen that, and I've looked at it closely. But in other places, yes, and we'll continue monitoring Venice. I'm always flexible on that.
While we're on this, we have to talk about this. The payouts that the city has made to bicyclists who have been severely injured on the city streets. You want them on bikes, but the streets aren't safe. And now you've got the streets department saying, we can't hire enough people to fix the streets, even though we have the money to do it.
We have
what millions paid out for severe injury?
Well, what's interesting is there's no more bike accidents than the past, but the payouts are higher. So we're looking at that. So I don't want people to have the impression there's suddenly double the accidents. It's about the same number. But that's happened to family members of mine. My predecessor, the mayor of LA, Antonio Villaraigosa, got hit when he was bicycling. And we are prioritizing fixing the streets where we have the most accidents, not just for bicycles, but for pedestrians and cars, and fixing those first. So you will see a prioritization that's never been done in the city. We just pave whatever, a record amount of paving, by the way. We've never seen so much paving in the city, and thanks to SB1, the gas tax, and Measure M, we'll probably have that even doubled beyond. So, but the first place should be the place that needs the most safety, not just the place with the worst roads. All
right, they're telling us to take a break. We'll be back with more Ask the Mayor right after this.
I've asked my woman about that.
You're watching Eyewitness Newsmakers.
We are back with questions from Mayor Eric Garcetti. Mr. Mayor, let's get to our next one.
Let's
this
do
is
it.
from Maureen Capra, Porter Ranch. How come you have not asked Governor Jerry Brown to shut down Aliso Canyon for our health and well-being?
I'm very supportive of transitioning away from natural gas and shutting down facilities that can be right next to communities like Porter Ranch that did bear this untenable burden of health with also methane leaks that were terrible for our environment in the entire globe. It doubled almost
Can the governor shut this down?
The governor oversees the regulators. I don't think it's as simple as saying shut down, but I support that position. It's just outside the city and the county, but we need to also reduce demand. So for me, whether it's transitioning away from coal, which is terrible for the environment, we're going to do that in just a few years, to getting off of all carbon forms of our electricity generation. That's a goal that I've already set so that we won't need natural gas. We won't need coal. We can have wind, solar, and the storage so that it can be constant. And I think we'll be the first big utility in the nation to do that with the Department of Water and Power.
Well, while we're at it, what's your concept of the idea of clean coal?
I've never seen clean, beautiful coal. I don't know, maybe our president has a different source for it, but sure, you can scrub it to be less polluting, but it still has the emissions that cause global warming, and it still can be very polluting to the people who live near coal plants. Here in LA, we've created 20,000 clean jobs in energy. 20,000. All the coal jobs in America are 50,000, and we're only 1% of the population here. So in Appalachia and other places, they should be getting with the same program we do because it'll create jobs for those coal miners and others. It's a dying way to get your electricity. We need to do better.
All right, another environmental question. This one from Teresa Marquez of Los Angeles. Why haven't you joined the Boyle Heights community in the Exide toxic lead contamination cleanup demands to include the highly contaminated parkways of homes?
Oh, I do, and I have, and with you know, Monsignor Moretta at Resurrection Church, going door to door, which I've done in Boyle Heights, where my family is from. I'm passionate about this, and we helped push the governor, who put in the budget $176 million, so it wasn't going to be a 20-year cleanup. It's going to happen the next few years. The cleanup, though, I agree with this person, shouldn't just happen in people's yards. The parkway, or you know, the sidewalks and the area next to the streets, also are used by human beings, and I think that state money should go there too. So even though I'm really pleased that finally in the 2-year period they will clean up all the homes, we need to do that also where human beings walk and live and work. So I'm very supportive of that. I publicly called for it, and the state should fund that.
All right, let's get to another question if we have time for it. This is from Kate Earned of Los Angeles. We desperately need wildlife crossings. What will it take to get them? Do you think they're important? Do you want to see another mountain lion die? No. This is referencing the proposal to build a pass over the 405 that'll connect the Santa Monicas.
I love this, and I think that, you know, we have our mountain lions and other wildlife that naturally, you know, go across some of the barriers that we have that are man-made, like our freeways. If ever there was a year to do this with a $6 billion surplus at the state level, we should be telling Fish and Game up there to help us make that happen. Our Mountains and Recreation Conservation Authority, which is in charge of the Santa Monica Mountains, it's a perfect time, one-time surplus, one-time cost, and something that can conserve really those creatures that were here long before we were and create this amazing city that's close to nature.
All right, let's see if we can get to one more question, and this is one that comes up because it's a little bit of a civic